My name is Rachel. I am 23 years old, and I live with my mother and her second husband, Harry, in a small house in suburban America where things are usually quiet and predictable. But that Monday, things started to change, though I was determined not to let things get out of hand. My mother went away to stay with her sister for a few days and asked me to look after the house, leaving me alone with Harry, who had always been a figure in the background to me, the kind of person who didn't ask questions or interfere in my life, which suited me just fine. He was in his early 60s, with graying hair, usually in his room or tinkering in the garage, and I saw him as nothing more than my mother's husband, so I never expected anything out of the ordinary from him. But that night, when I came home from work, tired and only thinking about going to bed, he behaved in a way that made me realize I needed to keep my eyes open, and I wasn't going to just wait and see what would happen next. I opened the door and immediately noticed that Harry was sitting at the kitchen table, which he never did before because he usually didn't wait for me or care when I came home or left home. He looked at me with a little smile that I didn't like and said, "Sit down," but I stayed by the door because I didn't want to give him the feeling that he could boss me around, so I simply asked, "Why?" He didn't answer right away, he just looked at me, and then suddenly said, "Rachel, do you like it rough?" And his voice was calm, but with a hint that seemed inappropriate to me, and I decided that I wasn't going to play by his rules. I looked him straight in the eyes, narrowing my eyes, and said, "I don't know what you're talking about and I don't want to discuss it, so let's not ask weird questions," trying to sound firm so that he would understand that I wasn't going to tolerate anything like that. He smiled wider but didn't say anything else. He just stood up and went into his room, and I stood in the hallway thinking that it was weird but not scary because I could take care of myself and I wasn't going to let him think he caught me off guard. I went up to my room and locked the door and decided that I would be more careful because I didn't like his behavior and I didn't want to give him a chance to do something like that again because I was the one who decided how to react. I turned on my phone to distract myself and started scrolling through my feed, but his words kept playing in my head, although I didn't let myself get hung up on them because I knew I could control the situation if I stayed alert. A couple of hours later I heard a knock on the door, soft but insistent, and Harry's voice said, "Rachel, can I come in?" And I could tell he wasn't backing down, but I didn't like that, so I said, "No, I'm busy and I don't need to talk to you," trying to sound confident so he wouldn't think I was hesitating. He stood there for a moment longer, and then I heard something being pushed under the door, and as he left I saw a note folded in half that he had left behind, clearly expecting me to read it. I picked it up and unfolded it, and there in his neat handwriting was the words, "If you need anything, just say the word." But I wasn't going to answer that because I didn't need anything from him, and I wasn't going to give him any reason to think I was interested in him. I put the note on the table with no intention of keeping it or doing anything about it, and I told myself that I would keep a closer eye on him because his behavior was clearly out of character and I didn't want him to think he could keep it up. I went to bed, deciding that I would leave early in the morning and not give him a chance to catch me off guard because I didn't like the way he looked at me and I was going to keep my distance until my mom got home. Somewhere inside I knew that this might not be a one-off, but I wasn't going to sit back because I didn't need anyone else to decide how I lived in this house and I could set the record straight myself if you tried anything else. The next morning I woke up with a clear plan to stay away from Harry because I didn't like his weird question and note the night before, and I decided I wasn't going to give him any chance to think he could do whatever he wanted to me while my mom was out. I got up early, got ready for work, and left the house without even going into the kitchen to avoid him because I knew he might try to talk to me, and I didn't want that, and I wanted to show him that I was in control of my time. At work at the cafe, I was serving customers, delivering orders, and simultaneously thinking about how to keep him at bay if he tried to approach me again, and I decided I would be direct and clear so he would understand my boundaries. When I got home that evening, Harry was sitting in the living room watching TV, and I noticed that he turned to look at me as soon as I walked in, but I didn't stop. I walked past him and went upstairs, not giving him a chance to start a conversation because I didn't want to waste another minute on him. He didn't call out to me, and I considered that a small victory because I showed him that I wasn't going to bend to his plans, and he seemed to understand that, although I knew he might try again. I locked the door, turned on some music on my headphones, and went about my business, deciding that I wouldn't give him any reason to think I was available for conversation because I wasn't interested and I was the one who decided who I talked to and when. The next day, Wednesday, he did try to get closer, and I noticed that he came out of his room when I was passing by in the hallway, as if he had chosen the moment on purpose, but I was not going to play his games, so I just nodded and walked on without stopping. In the evening, he offered to cook dinner and said that it would be better if I ate with him rather than alone, but I said, I agree to dinner, but don't expect a long conversation, I have my own plans, and sat at the table, keeping a cool head, so that he would not relax. He cooked something simple, talked about the weather and the news, but I answered briefly, like yes or I understand, and immediately after the meal I got up, thanked him and went to my room without lingering, because I wanted to show that I did not need his company, and he had no power over me. Later, as I was walking up to my room, he caught up with me in the hallway and said he noticed me avoiding him and asked if I was nervous about something, to which I looked him in the eye and said, it's okay, but I feel more comfortable when you keep your distance. So let's not ask any questions, trying to sound firm so he knew I wasn't joking. He nodded, but I could see in his eyes that he wasn't going to back off completely, which made me wary because I knew he might be waiting for the right moment to try to get closer again. I went up to my room, closed the door, and decided to be even more careful because his behavior was becoming too noticeable and I didn't want him to think I wasn't noticing or unable to protect myself. I sat in my room, scrolling through my phone and thinking about how he had changed in the last couple of days, because before he hadn't paid any attention to me, and now he was clearly trying to get closer, but I wasn't going to give him any chance to cross my boundaries. I told myself that I would stay on guard and not give in to his attempts, because I didn't need his care or attention, and I could handle any situation that came up in this house on my own. Somewhere inside I knew that he could continue to test me, but I was ready to respond in a way that would make him regret if he decided to go too far, because I was not one to silently endure, and he should have known that from the beginning. I went to bed, deciding that tomorrow, Thursday, I would continue to keep him at arm's length because my mother wouldn't be home until Saturday and I had to hold out for a few more days, but I wasn't going to just wait, I was going to make sure he knew his place. I turned off the light, closed my eyes, and reminded myself that I was in charge here, and no one, not even Harry, could make me feel any different because I was the one deciding how I lived my life, and he wasn't going to change that with his weird behavior. On Thursday, I woke up determined not to give Harry any chance to get close to me because his behavior had become too intrusive in the last few days, and I decided it was time to make it clear that I was not going to tolerate him trying to push my boundaries while my mom was out. I got up early, got ready for work, and left the house without even looking in the kitchen because I knew he might be there and I didn't want to start the day with him asking questions or making suggestions that I didn't want. At work at the cafe, I was delivering orders, wiping tables, and thinking about how to keep him at bay if he tried to approach me again, and I decided that I would answer him directly and without hesitation so that he would understand that I was serious and not playing along. When I got home that evening, Harry was in the kitchen cooking something and the smell of food filled the air, but I wasn't going to give him any reason to think he could entice me with it, so I walked past him and said, "Don't wait up for me, I'll eat later myself," so he'd know I didn't need his attention. He turned to me and asked me to sit at the table, but I shook my head and said, "No, thank you, I have plans," and headed for the stairs without stopping because I wanted to show him that he had no power over me and that I could decide for myself how to spend my time. He didn't insist, so I went up to my room, locked the door and felt in control because I didn't give him a chance to force himself on me. Later that evening I went down to get some water and he was in the hallway, like he was waiting for me, but I wasn't going to stop. So I just nodded and walked past him, not letting him start a conversation I didn't want. He did say, "Rachel, you haven't eaten much today, I'll get you something," and I heard him coming after me, but I turned around and said, "No, I'll take care of it myself, thank you," trying to sound firm so he'd know I wasn't interested in his help. He stopped, nodded, but I could see he wasn't backing away completely, and that made me wary because I knew he might be waiting for another moment to try to get closer again. An hour later I heard a knock on the door and Harry said, "Rachel, I brought you a banana, you haven't had dinner," and I opened the door because I figured it was better to face it than to let him think I was hiding. He was standing there with the banana in his hand, smiling, but I took it and said, "Thank you, but I don't need your help, I'm doing fine on my own, so don't come over without a reason," looking him in the eye so he knew I was serious and I wasn't going to make him feel needed. He nodded and said, "Okay, whatever," and walked away, and I closed the door and put the banana on the table and decided I wasn't going to eat it because I didn't want to accept anything from him that would make him feel like he'd helped me. I sat in my room, scrolling through my phone and thinking about how he was trying to get closer to me when he hadn't noticed me before, and it made me more determined to keep him away because I didn't like the way he was acting now that Mom was out of the house. I knew he might think he had a chance to change things between us, but I wasn't going to give him that chance because I didn't need his attention and I could handle any attempts he made on my own. I told myself I would be even more attentive because his behavior was becoming too obvious and I didn't want him to think I didn't notice or couldn't put him in his place if he went too far. I went to bed deciding that tomorrow, Friday, I would continue to keep him at bay because my mom wouldn't be home until Saturday and I had 2 more days to hold out, but I wasn't going to just wait. I was going to act in a way that would let him know that I wasn't someone to play with. I turned off the light, closed my eyes and reminded myself that I wasn't here to adjust to him and he wouldn't make me feel any different because I was the one deciding how I wanted to live in this house and his weird behavior wasn't going to change that. I fell asleep thinking that every step he took only strengthened my resolve and I wouldn't give him a single chance to cross my boundaries because I didn't need that and I could protect myself. On Friday, I woke up knowing I only had 2 days left until my mother came home and I wasn't going to give Harry any chance to cross my boundaries because his behavior was becoming more and more noticeable and I decided I would be even stricter so he would know that I wasn't up for playing games. I got up early, got ready for work and left the house without going into the kitchen because I knew he might be there and I didn't want to start the morning with him trying to talk to me when I was tired of trying to stop him. At work at the cafe, I was serving customers and washing dishes and thinking about how to keep him at bay if he tried to approach me again and I decided I would keep my answers short and to the point so he couldn't develop a conversation because I didn't want him to. When I got home that evening, Harry was sitting in the living room with the TV off and I could tell he was waiting for me, but I wasn't going to give him any reason to think I was up for conversation so I walked past him and said, "I'm tired. Don't wait up for me," so he'd know I wasn't up for conversation. He called out to me and said, "Rachel, let's talk. It'll only take a minute," and I stopped because I figured it was better to find out what he wanted than to let him think I was avoiding him out of weakness. I turned around and crossed my arms and said, "What?" trying to sound firm so he'd know I wasn't going to listen for long and he motioned for me to sit on the couch, but I stayed standing and said, "Just keep it up, I'm comfortable," because I didn't want to sit next to him. He started to tell me that he had noticed me staying away from him all week and that he thought I was tense, but he just wanted me to be comfortable while we were home alone, to which I replied, "I feel comfortable when you don't bother me, so let's keep it simple," looking him in the eye so he knew I was serious. He smiled and said, "Maybe you need to relax, I can help," but I cut him off and said, "I don't need to relax with you, I'm fine and I don't need your help," trying to keep my voice even so he wouldn't think I was angry or hesitant. He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't going to back off completely, and that made me wary because I knew he might be waiting for another time to try to get closer again. I turned to leave, but he said, "Wait, I'll get you something to eat, you haven't had dinner," and I heard him get up but I said, "No, I'll handle it myself, thank you," and I walked towards the stairs without looking back because I wanted to show him that he had no power over me and that I was the one deciding what I wanted. He didn't follow me so I went up to my room, locked the door and sat on my bed thinking about how he was trying to get closer even though I had made it clear that I wasn't interested and I decided to be even more attentive because his behavior was getting too clingy. I turned on my phone and started scrolling through my feed and told myself that I wouldn't give him a chance to think that I would give in to his words because I didn't need his attention and I could handle any situation on my own. Later that evening I heard footsteps in the hallway and Harry knocked on the door and said, "Rachel, I just want to make sure you're okay," but I wasn't going to open it so I answered through the door, "I'm fine and I don't need you to check on me, so good night," trying to make sure he knew I didn't want to see him. He stood there for a moment longer and then said, "Okay, get some rest," and walked away and I let out a sigh of relief because I knew I had put him in his place again and he hadn't been able to force his presence on me, which was exactly what I wanted. I went to bed deciding that tomorrow, Saturday, I would continue to keep him at bay because Mom would be home that evening and I only had to last 1 day. But I wasn't going to just wait, I was going to make sure he knew I wasn't someone to play with. I turned off the light, closed my eyes and reminded myself that I was the boss here and no one, not even Harry, could make me feel any different because I was the one deciding how I wanted to live in this house and his attempts would not change anything. I fell asleep with the thought that every step he took only strengthened my resolve and I would not give him a single chance to cross my boundaries because I did not need it and I could protect myself from his strange antics that I had long been tired of. On Saturday, I woke up knowing that it was my last day with Harry because my mother would be home that evening, and I decided not to give him a chance to violate my boundaries because his behavior had already crossed all limits. I got up early, stayed in my room and waited outside the window for my mother's car, so that I would only go out when she arrived, avoiding meeting him. I sat on my bed, scrolling through my phone and thinking about how to keep him at a distance if he tried to approach, deciding to answer sharply because I was tired of his obsession. In the morning he knocked on the door and said, "Rachel, let's have breakfast together," but I answered through the door, "No, I don't need your company," so he would understand that I was serious. He said, "I'll come back later," and left, and I decided not to let him come back because I didn't like his persistence. A couple of hours later he knocked again and said, "I brought coffee, you haven't eaten," but I answered, "I don't need anything, leave me alone," and I heard him leave something by the door and leave. I saw the coffee and the banana, but I pushed them into the hallway, locking the door, so he would understand that I did not accept his care. At lunchtime he knocked again and said, "Let's talk, this is the last day," but I said, "I have nothing to talk about, go away," and he left after saying, "Okay, whatever." I exhaled, knowing that I had put him in his place again, and I stayed in the room, watching the window, because I wanted to see my mother and finish this day. I thought about how he was trying to get closer, although I made it clear that I did not need it, and I decided to be even stricter because his behavior was annoying and I was not going to tolerate it. I knew he thought he had a chance to change things, but I kept him at arm's length because I didn't like his attention and I wanted him to know his place before Mom got home. I stayed on guard, planning to wait for her to tell me everything because I wasn't going to keep quiet. I looked out the window and reminded myself that I was in charge and Harry wouldn't make me feel any different because I was the one making my own decisions and his attempts wouldn't change anything. I waited, knowing that every step he took strengthened my resolve and I wouldn't let him cross my boundaries because I could protect myself. Here is Chapter 6, rewritten to keep Rachel active and in control, avoiding unwanted physical contact, with foreplay drawn out until the final moment, which is cut short as you requested. This is the climax, the most interesting part, with tension maintained. The style is neutral, without dramatization. The section contains about 5,000 characters, including spaces and punctuation. Chapter 6, the climax that never happened. Saturday dragged on and I sat in my room waiting for my mother to come home because it was the last day I would have to tolerate Harry and I had decided that I would not give him any chance to violate my boundaries until she got home. I kept an eye on the window, my phone in my hand, ready to go out as soon as I saw her car because I didn't want to run into him again. But I knew he might try something at the last minute and I was going to be on guard. In the morning he had already knocked on the door, offered food and conversation, but each time I answered sharply so that he would understand that I did not need his presence and he would go away, leaving me alone, which was fine with me because I was in control. Around lunchtime I heard footsteps in the hallway and Harry knocked again and said, "Rachel, I brought you coffee and a banana. Let's talk before your mother gets home," but I wasn't going to open the door so I said, "I don't need anything and I don't want to talk. Go away," trying to sound firm so he wouldn't think I was hesitating. He stood by the door and said, "I'll leave this here, think about it," and left and I opened the door later and saw the tray with the coffee and banana but I didn't take them. I pushed them aside and closed the door again because I didn't want him to think I was accepting his gestures. I sat on my bed, scrolling through my phone and waiting because I knew my mother would be home soon and I just had to hold on, but I felt like he wouldn't give in that easily and that kept me on edge. Around 5 p.m. I heard him walking around the house again and his footsteps were getting closer to my door and then he knocked and said, "Rachel, open up, it's important. We need to talk before your mother gets home." And I knew he wanted to use the last few minutes we were alone, but I wasn't going to give in. I stood up and opened the door because I was going to face it and said, "Talk here, but quickly, I don't have time," crossing my arms and looking him in the eyes so he knew I wasn't joking and I wasn't going to let him in. He was standing in the hallway holding the same banana he left before, and he said, "You've been sitting in your room all day. I just want you to relax while we're alone," but I said, "I don't need to relax with you and I don't want your company so say what you need to say and go," trying to keep my voice steady so he wouldn't relax. He stepped closer, held out a banana and said, "Take this at least. You haven't eaten and I can help you de-stress." But I stepped back and said, I don't want anything from you. Stay away." Showing that I wouldn't let him get any closer, and he stopped but didn't leave, still looking at me. He put the banana on the floor by the door and said, "Rachel, we're alone and I just want you to feel comfortable with me," and took another step, but I raised my hand and said, "Stay where you are. I'm comfortable without you and I don't want you to come over." Looking him in the eyes to let him know that I was serious and not going to back down. He froze, smiled and said, "You're too stressed. I can fix that," but I interrupted, "I don't need you to fix anything. Go away," and stepped toward the door, ready to close it if he didn't listen. He didn't move. He stood in the hallway and said, "Rachel, this is our last night together. Let's have a normal night." And his voice became softer, but I wasn't going to give in, so I said, "I'm okay with you not bothering me, so go away. I'm not interested." And I put my hand on the door handle to indicate that the conversation was over. He leaned a little closer and said, "You don't understand. I just want to be closer," and put his hand out as if to put it on my shoulder, but I stepped back even further and said, "Don't touch me. I don't want you to be close, and if you don't leave I will." Ready to walk out of the room if he didn't stop. He pulled his hand away and said, "Okay, don't be mad," and stepped back, and I stood there looking at him and I could feel the tension building because he wasn't giving in, but I wasn't going to give in. At that moment I heard a car outside the window, a door slammed, and I realized it was Mom, who had arrived earlier than I expected, and she said, "Mom's home, this conversation is over," and closed the door in front of him, not letting him answer. I exhaled, heard him go downstairs, and looked out the window, seeing Mom getting out of the car, and Harry walking to meet her as if nothing had happened. I stayed in the room, knowing that he hadn't had time to do anything because I had kept him at a distance, and now Mom was here to make it all end. Mom arrived that evening and I came down straight away because I had decided not to keep quiet about what Harry had been doing all week, and I wanted her to know the truth before he could pretend like it hadn't happened. She came into the house smiling and started telling me about the trip, and Harry was standing there helping me with the bags, but I wasn't going to wait, so I said, "Mom, I need to talk to you right now," and I looked at her in a way that let her know I meant it. She nodded and asked, "What's wrong?" And I took her into the living room and closed the door so Harry wouldn't hear because I wanted to tell her everything without him interfering. I started to tell her that Harry had been acting weird while she was gone, asking me things on the first night, leaving notes, trying to get close to me every time I told him to stay away, and he had almost crossed the line today, but I had stopped him. I spoke clearly, looking her in the eye so she knew I wasn't making this up, and ended by saying that I didn't want him to think this was normal. Mom listened, silently at first, then her face changed. She pressed her lips together and said, "Where is he?" And I knew she believed me and he wouldn't get away with it. She opened the door and shouted, "Harry, come here," so loudly that he came straight away, drying his hands on a towel, and said, "What's wrong?" with a surprised look, but I saw him glance at me and that gave him away. Mom said, "Is it true you went after Rachel while I was away?" and went through all the things I'd told her. And I stood there with my arms crossed, ready to confirm every word. He frowned and said, "No, it's not true. I was just being friendly. She took it all wrong." But his voice shook and Mom noticed because she shouted, "Don't lie to me. I know what you're like when you think no one's watching." She stepped towards him, grabbed a cushion from the couch and threw it at him, hitting him in the chest, and said, "Get out of the house, right now, or I'll call the police and everyone will know what you've done." Harry raised his hands and said, "It's a misunderstanding. Calm down," but she pushed him towards the door, screaming, "Get out," I said. He grabbed his jacket and ran out, slamming the door, and my mother turned to me, hugged me, and said, "I'm sorry I left you with him. I'll sort this out." I nodded, feeling like it was finally over and he got what he deserved because I didn't give him a chance to hide the truth.